If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy.
So, Beaker, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Well, first interested in aviation was actually about 6 months before I was born because my dad was an Air Force pilot and he was deployed to Vietnam. And so my mom was living with her grandparents up in Illinois, up outside of Chicago. And then he came back. I was about 6 months old. And then from there, we moved to Bitburg, Germany, where my dad was flying F-4s there. And he eventually got out after that tour and got on with Delta Airlines. And so we flew commercially for about 30 years. So I grew up around aviation. I read books about aviation. And I think deep down inside my heart, I always wanted to be a better pilot than my dad. And so the only way to do that was to go into the Navy. When I got towards high school, I was able to secure a appointment to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And one of the benefits of going to the Merchant Marine Academy is when you graduate, you can get a commission in any of the armed services that you want: Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, NOAA, Marine Corps. And so I opted for the Naval Aviation Program, got a pilot slot. And I thought that'll show them, I'll land on an aircraft carrier. And I always thought landing on an aircraft carrier one time would be a lot of fun, to be neat to do, something, a unique experience. And then I realized that once you do it once, they want you to do it a lot more than that. And so I ended up with about 917 traps throughout my career, roughly 917, yeah.
Nice. So can you talk us through a bit about your initial training, what you flew before you moved on to the Tomcat?
Absolutely. So in the waning days of the Reagan era there in 1988 or so, we were still using a number of different training aircraft. So I started off in Pensacola with just the basic ground school type aviation pre-flight indoctrination. Then I went on to Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in South Texas to fly the T-34C. It was a turboprop aircraft. Got about 70 hours in that, formation, aerobatics, instruments, that sort of thing. And from there, that's where the Navy breaks you into the different pipelines based on availability and performance. And just by luck of the draw, I happened to get jets. They were very highly coveted slots. And so coming across one of those, I was just very fortunate. A lot of helicopter slots, not as many jet slots. And so from there, I went down to Naval Air Station Kingsville, and we started off in intermediate jet training in the T-2C Buckeye. And that was just a fun airplane, stable, easy to fly, easy to spin and depart, because that's what we did the spin training in, and got my first initial carrier qualification in the T2. We got 4 traps in the T2 and a couple touch and goes on the USS Lexington, which is now a museum down in Corpus Christi. Once we did that carrier qualification in the T2, we went to the TA-4J. Another amazing airplane. Just love flying the A4. A bit small, a bit tight, but just a lot of fun to fly. And the culmination of the A4 training, we did air to ground, we did BFM, we did basic 1v1 stuff, and the culmination was the carrier qualification. And again, out the USS Lexington with a couple touch and goes and 6 traps, and I was a winged naval aviator after that in 1990.
So then obviously you got posted to the Tomcat, which we're here to talk about. What were your first thoughts of that aircraft?
Well, first of all, before you get your wings, they ask you to list your preferences. I happened to do really well at the weapons delivery stuff that we did down in El Centro, California, out in the desert there. And I thought, hey, I'm destined for attack. This is going to be great because all those, what is it, the spirit of attack born of a brave heart. And the other saying they had was nothing influences political policy more than two bombs in the dictator's backyard rather than two fighters off the coast. So I thought, hey, attack is where I'm going to be. So I listed A7s, first of all, then A6s. And then they were still giving out the A3 slots at the time. I thought, hey, that looks like a really neat big airplane to fly.
Yeah.
And when they gave me my orders, it turns out I did really well at the boat. They said, since you had good grades at the boat, the Tomcat's the hardest plane to land on the carrier. We're going to give you the Tomcat. I'm like, well, thank you very much for the challenge. I appreciate that. And so I went off to San Diego to Naval Air Station Miramar, joined VF-124, which was the RAG, the Replacement Air Group, out there where they do all the training on the West Coast. And introduction to the Tomcat, big airplane. It was just amazing. Of course, I got to Miramar in 1990, and it's still thriving off the days and the memories of the Top Gun movie there. Thank you very much, Tom Cruise. And so the Officers Club was still packed every Wednesday night. The Oro was still there. It was really pretty magical. And of course, who wouldn't want to live in San Diego? So started up training with them, and it was just all academics. The first computer-based training I ever did was there. We did some of that, still a lot of lectures. And then, of course, you go out for your first flight. The first flight in the Tomcat was really amazing. They put a pilot in the back seat instead of a Rio because there are no training versions of the Tomcat. And so there's only one stick up front and a very, very brave instructor pilot in the back to go out with somebody for their first ride in the Tomcat. And you launch up, he talks you through everything, you go out, and one of the first maneuvers you do is you level off about 1,000 feet, full zone 5 afterburner, get up to about 500 knots or so, pull it 90 degrees nose up, and you're up at 25,000 feet in about, I don't know, minute and a half. And it's just an incredible introduction to the Tomcat. And then you come on back after some more maneuvers and some basic handling, just to get your feel for the qualities of the aircraft, how it does slow, how it does fast, wing sweep, that sort of thing. And you start doing touch and goes in the pattern. And that's where your carrier qualification training starts right there. You just do it over and over again, flying the ball, making those power corrections, because you could be the best fighter pilot in the world, but if you can't land on the carrier, the Navy's got no use for you.
So when you were going through this training phase, would you be practicing more beyond visual range stuff, or would you practice the dogfighting stuff as well?
It started off in a building block approach. So we started off with basic formation, then tactical formation maneuvering, going to emerge, trying to keep sight of everybody, some 1v1 and some 2v2, but that was about it. The focus primarily was on 1v1, coordinating with the Rio, doing some basic intercepts, but complex tactics were not a part of the training. You would get that later on in the squadron. You'd learn how to do a visual mark, coming in a wide spread with an unidentified person. The lead would take the unidentified bogey close aboard. You would lead turn and do the ID and be in a offensive position on it. Just basic tactics like that. Some 1v1 and then just some basic 2v2 type stuff, but nothing too complicated. And then, of course, culminating in carrier qualification.
Yeah, so can you talk us through the carrier landing? Would you practice that quite often, or did you only get a few goes at it?
Every time you came back, you would do practice landings. You'd sit there, you'd fly the ball, you'd get debriefed every time. And of course, that's one of the things that separates the Navy from the Air Force is the Air Force flaring. And as long as they walk away from it, everything's good. But in the Navy, every landing you do is debriefed, whether it's the backseater, whether it's yourself, whether it's a landing signal officer on the carrier. Every landing counts, and you sit there, practice it. We did have dedicated, what they call field carrier landing practice sessions, where you'd go out with an LSO, would sit in a shack by the side of the runway. They'd turn off all the runway lights except for a little patch that is the same size and shape as the landing area in the carrier. and you sit there and go around the pattern at night because that's the more challenging environment. And you practice your approach turn, hitting your numbers, being on speed, coming around the corner, catching the ball, calling the ball, making those corrections, and trying to fly that elusive OK pass. We did the field carrier landing practices both at Miramar. We did some out at El Centro, which was really cool. It was about a 30-minute flight or so to the east over the mountains. And it's in the desert. So what they would do is they'd turn off all the lights on the airport while you're doing it. So you're literally flying around in a black hole and you got to trust your numbers. And it was really difficult to do well. And of course, the ultimate graduation type thing for field carrier landing practice was to go out to San Clemente Island, which is off the coast of San Diego. And there you'd practice your night instrument approach to the field. And the San Clemente runway was at the end of a cliff. And so there would be some really nasty winds, either crosswinds or things that would suck you down. It was really, really challenging. So the joke out on the West Coast was that landing on the carrier was good practice for flying into San Clemente because it was so challenging. So it was great practice at night. You were just working your tail off. The LSOs would be out there on the shack and you'd get in, 6, 8, maybe 10 passes and then go back to the beach and swap out. Another student would get in and go out there. But they really put you through the ringer to go out there for the first time.
And can you remember your first time actually landing on the boat?
Absolutely. It was on board the USS Nimitz and was actually kind of a sad day as well as being an exciting day. I went out there in 1991 to carrier qualify, and there was a Miramar legend. His name was Bug Roach. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he was a legend out there at Miramar. He was a Vietnam guy. All his buddies made admiral. He was just happy flying. He was really kind of famous for taking an F-8, I think it was, he was flying at the time. I'd have to double check that. But he took off out of Miramar. The engine quit. He ejected. The plane landed, crashed, caught on fire, started catching the house on fire. He jumped out of his parachute, then went over and started fighting the fire. I mean, the guy was just legendary, and they kept him around because all his friends were admirals. He ended up being a commander at the time, and he flew with the aggressor squadron. And when I was going out there to carrier qualify for the first time during the day on the Nimitz, he was out doing an ACM flight with one of the Tomcat squadrons. He was flying an A4 at the time. He had an engine fire. He had to eject, and there was a problem with the seat. The A4 had a spreader gun for the parachute when you eject, and the spreader gun didn't fire, and so he ended up in the water. Didn't make it, but the Nimitz was on hold while they sent a helicopter, their plane guard helicopter, to go over and pick him up. So that is always stuck in my mind. And then, of course, going down there for the first time, the Tomcat, daytime was manageable, but first time at night just really get your blood going. I will admit I did have one or two wave offs initially. There was a couple bolters in there perhaps, but my boarding rate and grades were enough to get me to my fleet squadron, which I joined 2 days after finishing my night carrier landings. And
Wow.
I think I sobered up after that by the time I rolled in there. So, yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about your first squadron and your other squadrons. What was life like on the ship as, I guess, a combat aviator at this point?
So, first squadron was VF-111 Sundowners, great squadron. They ended up getting decommissioned in '95, but now they're an aggressor squadron down in Key West, Florida. I joined it. I was one of the first folks to join in about a year or so. They had a bunch of JOs that joined about a year and a half prior. They did a lot of exercises, a lot of workups, but the squadron got caught in between cruises. So they had about 2 years between cruises at that point, excuse me, about a year and a half. I joined the squadron right as they were starting workups. So I showed up in the squadron on a Friday morning, and on a Saturday, I jumped on an airlift out to Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach. And I got my first flight in VF-111, flying a field carrier landing practice because we were joining the USS Kitty Hawk the next day and taking the USS Kitty Hawk around South America back to San Diego because she had just come out of the shipyard. So my first introduction to VF-111 was a 2-month cruise around San Diego, South America, excuse me, back to San Diego. And they said, hey, you just carrier qualified. You should be good to go, but we'll just get you 1 or 2 night traps to get the feel for it. Oh, and by the way, you're flying the jet with the TARPS pod. I'm like, what's the TARPS pod? And the TARPS pod is this 2,000-pound photo wet film photo pod that the Tomcat would carry to do tactical reconnaissance. And so I said, okay, anything I need to know about it? I said, yeah, just be careful. If you pull a little too hard, the nose will really come up and you'll get really slow. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. So I go out and my first pass at night to the carrier in VF-111 with the TARP pod. Sure enough, I put in a little backstick, added a little power, and I brought the nose way up and it got waved off. Came around again, managed to get my trap after that. But that was my introduction. And then the South America cruise was easy, very nice. Got some traps in. We did a little work with Argentina at the time. In fact, they flew their E2s. I think they had E2s. I forget. Or S3s. But they flew some of their planes out and did 1 or 2 traps on the carrier, and we launched them and some touch and goes. And then we came back up and pulled into San Diego and got ready for our next cruise, which departed in the fall of 1992. That cruise was interesting. We started off thinking we were going to the Persian Gulf, Northern Arabian Gulf, to do Operation Southern Watch. And we got diverted almost as soon as we got over there to Somalia, where we participated in Operation Restore Hope. My first real sort of combat mission was doing a photo reconnaissance mission over Somalia on Christmas Eve, 1992. And I remember launching. It was a day launch. We were going to go out and film some checkpoints that the rebels were holding. And we went out and filmed, took all the shots that we needed to do with the photo reconnaissance pod. The sun was setting on Christmas Eve. And I said, hey, let's, we had a soft deck of 10,000 feet and a hard deck of 5,000 feet. And I said, hey, let's just drop down to about 5,000 feet and just check out things while we're waiting to recover aboard the carrier. And so I was watching the sunset on Christmas Eve over Africa. It was really kind of memorable as a young junior officer. And then we looked down at Somalia and said, oh, look, everybody's turning on their lights. Everything's twinkling right now. And then we realized, hang on a sec, they don't have electricity. They're shooting at us. What's going on? So we immediately sort of popped up and like, okay, that was stupid. And then we went back and recovered aboard the USS Kitty Hawk. After doing a number of missions over Somalia, we went up and did Operation Southern Watch, which was a recurring theme in my career. Lots of time over Iraq doing the no-fly zone. A lot of photo reconnaissance missions over Iraq. Kind of interesting because when we were doing the photo reconnaissance, we would also get what was called an ECA. It was an extended chaff adapter. So because we were flying in predictable patterns, we're flying through possible surface-to-air missile zones, it gave us about just a buttload of chaff to put out. But to get the chaff to come out, you have to have your master arm on. And of course, we also had live missiles and guns. And so it was always got to be careful with your thumb where it was going to make sure you didn't accidentally select something because the master arm was on. And of course, you'd hit your pickle button to get the chaff out. But yeah, it was a tricky tricky sort of finger work, but it was fun. And we did a lot of missions, not many intercepts. Nobody really wanted to come out and play, but it was interesting to get very familiar with the southern half of Iraq.
And when you were on board, would you work closely with the Hornet guys, and was there a big rivalry there as well?
There was a little bit of disdain for them as well because, like I mentioned, landing the Tomcat was hard. And the Hornets, I was also a landing signal officer, so I'm going out there on the platform and grading their landings. And it's like they're not even trying. They're just on, three-wire. It's like, what? They're cheating. They're cheating somehow. That's not right. And of course, the Tomcat's coming down, and it's high, it's low, it's going this, it's going that way. And oh, it boltered. Okay, there you go. And so there was some disdain over that. Also, the fact that they hardly had any gas. They were always tanking. They're low on gas. Oh, I'm bingo. Okay, I need to be first one down at night because I'm low on gas. So we would make fun of them for that. But there's a little bit of envy as well because the airplane, the radar, the Tomcat radar was phenomenal at a distance, huge power out. But inside about 30 to 20 miles, it just wasn't that good. Meanwhile, the Hornet radar at the time couldn't see much past 35, 40 miles, but inside of 20 miles, it was amazing. It was really, really good. So a little bit of envy there. Just for a contrast, on the second cruise, we did an exercise off the coast of Guam, and they had B-52s come in to simulate an attack on the carrier. And I was out there on the exercise. We're out about 100 miles from the carrier. We got the radar on, and all of a sudden my Rio says, hey, radar contact 193 for 150 miles. Because the radar cross section of the B-52 is so big, we could see them just phenomenally. And we're like, oh, this is going to be super nice. So we go in, he's painting them, calling them down, locking them up, doing all sorts of things. B-52 gets into about 50 miles. Everything's looking great. 40 miles. We're about ready to take a shot, simulated practice shot. And the Rio locks him up. And then all of a sudden, the B-52 turns on their ECM gear and says, I don't think I like your radar locking on me. And our radar dish just started going boom, 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 wow. Boom. It was just getting knocked all over the place. Like, turn it off. Don't break the airplane. And so we just had to sort of continue on until we picked him up visually and did a couple Fox 2s there. But wow, that was an interesting exercise.
Yeah. And did you ever work with like other nations? And did you ever get to fly like DACT against some, unusual types?
Absolutely. So my second Tomcat squadron was VF-41, the Black Aces. And we did a couple really interesting things with them. VF-111, we did the standard. We flew against some F-16s out of Korea on our second cruise. But with VF-41, we did some interesting stuff. We did a maple flag exercise up in Canada. And that was just amazing international. I mean, there was Jaguars, there was some German MiG-29s that were on the ramp. You'd go out there and just never knew who you were going to play with. We did an exercise with the RAF up off the coast of Scotland. I thought, man, Scotland during the summer, this is going to be phenomenal. The sun's going to be up really late. Everything's going to be a day landing. And then, of course, nobody really mentioned your weather. And so we got up there, the sun was up, it was beautiful, but there was a 600-foot overcast, and so it was still pitch black underneath, so it's still a night landing. And then we also did a detachment. This was a lot of fun. This is in our 2001 cruise in VF-41. We did a detachment to Nevatim Air Base in Israel, and we spent 2 weeks training with the IAF. And we'd take off out of Nevatim, northerly heading, turn west before you hit the nuclear reactor, go out over the Mediterranean, and they would set up a presentation, their F-16s or F-15s. We'd engage, flow through, turn around, reset, come back eastbound, flow through, do another presentation, another engagement. Turn south, we had to stay above 16,000 feet going over the Gaza Strip because they were worried about surface-to-air missiles and some AAA coming up at us. And then we'd head to a bombing range down south towards Eilat. And what's interesting down there is you got to sort of keep, Israel gets very narrow down south as you get close to the Red Sea. And so at the bombing range, you would roll in and drop, but you got to keep sort of a constant 2 to 3 Gs on. Because if you spill out to you'll spill out to the east to Egypt, you'll spill out over to Jordan, over to Saudi. It's just, it was just really tight airspace down there, but just a fun detachment there. Amazing pilots there in the IAF, just incredibly talented, very well practiced. We actually had a MiG killer night while we were on the detachment there. And the IAF came in and brought in some of their folks who had air-to-air kills during 70 Yom Kippur, also Peace for Galilee in 1982. And they were talking about some of the engagements they had. We talked to them about our experience in Kosovo when we did Operation Allied Force. Of course, no real air-to-air engagement there, but a lot of air-to-ground stuff that they could relate to. So that was really fascinating.
And just going back a bit here, Beaker, you mentioned that you work with the RAF off of Scotland. Can you remember what aircraft you were going up against or working with?
I believe we were working with tornadoes. We did some exercises with tornadoes. And again, I think one of our most memorable missions was actually getting all the coordinates for the whiskey distilleries. And so we did a photo reconnaissance mission of all the whiskey distilleries in Scotland. And that was really kind of exciting. Well, we mailed in some of the photos we took, but we didn't get any free bottles back. So shout out to Scotland. You still owe us something there.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get on that for you. But yeah, obviously you've talked about being on live ops. Can you maybe share a few more stories from flying on live ops there? Because you mentioned Iraq there as well. And
Absolutely. So Iraq was, for the most part, in VF-111, it was simply combat air patrol, making sure enforcing the no-fly zone, doing TARPS missions. The Tomcat was just air-to-air at that point and not air-to-ground. Then in VF-41 was a very active tour for me. I joined them in the summer of 1998. And it was after an exchange tour, which I think we're going to talk about next. And we departed for a cruise in the spring of '99 and deployed immediately to the Adriatic Sea on the USS Theodore Roosevelt to participate in Operation Allied Force. And a lot of mostly air to ground, just about all air to ground. I did fly a number of combat air patrols hanging over Macedonia, waiting for some planes to show up. They never did. The Air Force got a couple kills off of that, but the U.S. Navy, we didn't really have any air-to-air action at all. Mostly air to ground. When we first started the air to ground missions there, the targeting process was very complicated as it was a NATO operation, so it's very difficult to get targets on the approved target list. We went out on our first night, and again, I had a lot of experience after my exchange tour with the Air Force using a FLIR. The Tomcat had just gotten the Lantern pod, and it was just a phenomenal asset for the Tomcat for two reasons. One, we could drop laser-guided bombs, and number two, for the F-14A, there was a GPS inside the Lantern pod, and that gave us much better navigation than our inertial navigation system, which drifted 2 miles, 4 miles an hour. So we loved having that GPS on the Lantern pod. We go out for our first missions and we've got our images and all that, and we get to the target area. The FLIR is pointing exactly where it's supposed to be because it's GPS. And it's like, this doesn't look at anything at all like the pictures. It was because most of the targets had been hit already, and we were just hitting some of the same target areas. And so it's just a question of finding something inside that area to hit. After those initial target sets, they were a lot more aggressive about getting more target sets out of there. And also, there was a gentleman in our squadron, Brian Brewwood. He was instrumental in getting Tomcats into the Forward Air Controller Airborne, the FAC-A program, and he got trained on that. And so we started doing a lot of controlling, finding targets, and essentially coordinating strikes for both the Tomcats and the Hornets were being used mostly as trucks. They would come in with their Mavericks and they would get about 7 miles. We would laser targets for them. They would release the Mavericks and then go home, usually laser guided Mavericks, rarely use the IR ones. We would target artillery, vehicles, you name it, bridges, buildings. The Flying was interesting because there was an active surface-to-air missile threat, but the Serbians were very, very clever about how they did that. They wouldn't just light up because we had a lot of harm. We had a lot of prowler support. So they were very, very cautious. But every now and then, if you weren't being careful, you got low and slow, they would wait until you were low and slow. They would light you up. And I know my wingman, Salami Celebi, he got quite a few missiles thrown at him one time. It was very, very anxious. I had one or two times where they had a couple shots at me. But again, they were very, very selective and very, very careful. But as a result, we also were able to take our time over the target area. The AAA was very conservative. It was there, but again, they're very cautious about being hit. They're very smart how they played their hand. So because of the weather, we would generally have to make one or two practice runs just to make sure that we could see the target throughout the whole time of flight of the weapon, because we didn't want the target being obscured by the clouds at the end. So we'd do one or two runs, make sure it was clear. Then we drop our weapon. And of course, if you don't have video, it didn't happen. So that was very, very careful to ensure that you got that video and you had clear line of sight to make sure the target hit what it was supposed to hit. Challenging being in a quasi-European environment, you want to be very careful about collateral damage, hitting only what you're supposed to hit. And sometimes in the case of bridges, just wondering who was in that car that just went over the bridge before you hit it. Things like that. It was challenging at times, and it does leave you with a little bit of baggage.
Yeah, before we move on, you kind of shared a few stories there, but have you got maybe one or two that really stick out in your mind from flying the Tomcat?
So I have to say the funnest one was in Kosovo. We had to do a TARPS mission. They said, for the resolution we need for this particular mission, we need you to be down at 3,000 feet. We're like, 3,000 feet, AG? What are you joking? That's right in the heart of everything. Like, we need it to be at 3,000 feet. We're like, okay, we're going to be supersonic though. And so we went in, we tanked, and we full tank of gas, 20,000 pounds. We nosed it over, stage 1 or 2 burner, got to the number, and we were supersonic over western Kosovo for about 6 minutes or so, covered a lot of ground, blew out every window in western Kosovo, I think, got the footage and came on back. So that was pretty fun. Another one in Kosovo in particular was, I mentioned it was difficult getting targets on the target list. One particular field that was difficult was Podgorica airfield. It was actually in Montenegro, but the Serbs were launching a lot of aircraft out of there. And so that airfield became a live target at very short notice. The Air Force said it was out of their planning cycle, so they asked the Navy if we could do it. And we said, you betcha. And they started planning at, I think, 6 or 7 o'clock that night. The next morning, every aircraft on the deck that was flyable launched. I mean, the deck was empty. We did all internal tanking. The S-3s were out there. They topped everybody off. Every Hornet that could fly, every Tomcat that could fly went up in just one big, huge wave. A shout out to our sister squadron, VF-14 at the time. Slapshot Carter, I think, was the skipper. They dropped a couple of GBU 27s, 24s, excuse me. I'm confusing my F-117 there. Penetrators right into the mountain hangar storage facility, and just did a phenomenal job on that. They did great. The Hornets cratered the runway, took out the entire ramp. I mean, the entire air wing was out there. And of course, the S-3s just giving us gas. Then they would go top off on the Air Force tankers, come back and bring us back to the boat. That was phenomenal. Over in VF-41 on our second cruise in 2001, we were leaving the Straits of Hormuz on September 10th after a 6-month cruise, looking forward to a port visit in Durban, South Africa, which would have been the first time a nuclear carrier visited there on the USS Enterprise in about 20 years or so. And we woke up the next morning to September 11th, and we realized we weren't going home at that point. And so we went on over to the coast of Pakistan. We spent another 3 months there, and we launched the opening sorties in Enduring Freedom. And We had a lot of missions over there taking out Taliban targets. We were started working initially with some controllers. Like, how did we didn't have the full picture of what was going on the ground, but apparently there were controllers there. And as time wore on, we found out more and more what was going on the ground over there. But they would talk to us, give us some coordinates, or give us a target description, and we would drop and hit all these as long as the pre-approved targets. But there was one mission I went up there. I was over Kabul, and they said, "Hey, we've got a building we want to hit. It's downtown. It's kind of hard to find, so we'll talk you on it." I said, "Okay, this is what I've got." Like, no, that's not it. No, that's not it. They said, "Hang on a sec. I'll give you a mark." I said, "Okay, what's the mark going to be?" He said, "It's going to be a Hellfire." Like, a Hellfire? Who's got a Hellfire? That's got to be either a helicopter or an A-10 dropping that. And there were no aircraft, Air Force airsats, aircraft assets in theater. So I'm like, okay, whatever. And so I was looking through the FLIR, saw the Hellfire hit, so got the lays on it, got the pod on it, about ready to drop. They said, "Oh, abort. Target was destroyed." And then I saw a UAV fly through my field of view. I'm like, we have UAVs over here? What? That's it. Nobody told me about that. And so that was my first intro to Hellfires on UAVs over there. A lot of interesting stories just flying around Afghanistan, some long missions. I flew once for about 11 hours, just tank, no targets, tank, find targets. Tomcat had a unique ability to leak hydraulic fluid, and that was good because if it wasn't leaking, then it means it was under service. But after about 11 hours one time, heading back to the carrier, one of my hydraulic systems failed. And so going back on one hydraulic system, still powered everything. But in the Tomcat, you're always concerned because if one hydraulic system failed, if it was the pump, that's great. But if all the fluid drained out, the way the system worked, it could burn up the other pump on the other system, and then you'd have a fire, and that would be bad. So we were cautiously waiting on that. But again, the Tomcat always brought me home safely. Lots of gas, took a lot of punishment, and a number of hard landings, I have to admit. And that was the nice thing about the Tomcat. It wouldn't tell on you if you had a hard landing unless you actually bottomed out the struts and skidded some of the vertical stabs underneath. The Hornet, on the other hand, which I flew later on in my career, would pop a code with a hard landing, so there's no way you could get away with it. So Tomcat was very forgiving in that regard.
Really good stuff. Well, it sounds like you had a great time on the Tomcat.